Okay, next I wanted to, and this is very exciting, to turn it over to Alicia Lieberman to talk about the Child Trauma Research Program, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary and has done just incredible work nationally, internationally, and is certainly just a tremendously important and exciting part of the department. So I will turn it to Alicia.
Thank you very much, Adri. Thank you for this opportunity. It means a lot to me to share our journey of the past 25 years. And I will start with an overview, and then some leaders of my program will talk about the different facets of the work. Brief look at our beginnings. Patricia and I started CTRP at the request of Dr. Robert Oken, then psychiatry chief at San Francisco General. And at the time, many people believed that very young children don't need treatment because they either don't notice or recover quickly from traumatic events. And we don't need this slide, by the way, if it can be taken off. We now know that actually young children do need treatment. The first 5 years are the most vulnerable to trauma, but they are also the most responsive to intervention. And in spite of this, for a long time, Patricia and I were told that we risk re-traumatizing and stigmatizing mothers, for example, who were victims of domestic violence or DV, as bad mothers when we offered treatment to them and their young children. We were fortunate to have influential allies, including the presiding judge of the San Francisco Superior Court, who worked with Patricia to secure a major federal grant to help young children exposed to DV in San Francisco. And the mothers and the children did the rest. Mothers described their relief when they learned from us that their depression and anger were understandable responses to the abuse that they suffered from those they loved. "You mean I'm not crazy?" was a response that we heard again and again. "You mean my child doesn't need to be just like his father?" The young children were our best teachers. A 3.5-year-old girl, Marsha, told us with a sigh, "My daddy hits my mommy. My mommy hits me. Not nice." Marsha, in turn, hit her dolls, her dog, her peers, so much so that other children did not want to play with her. Next slide, please. We found so much value in naming aloud the frightening specifics of our patients' lives that we coined the term "speaking the unspeakable" to describe the core of our treatment, child-parent psychotherapy. We created a simple clinical formulation tool, the CPP triangle that you see here, to normalize trauma responses and create new and supportive meanings. We make explicit links between what happened to the parent and the child and their symptoms, offer hope by reminding them of what makes them feel good, and present treatment as a place where they can learn to be safe. The clinician answered Marsha saying, "That's very sad. Your daddy was scary and then he left, and now your mommy and you are mad and sad, and everybody hits and cries. But your mommy loves you and she wants things to be nice, and I know how to help." In response, Marsha brought a teddy bear to the clinician and said, "Kiss it." The clinician did, and Marsha brought the teddy bear to her mom, who also kissed it, and then Marsha kissed it, and then the mom kissed Marsha, and then they huddled. And in these exchanges, Marsha was showing us that what she wanted treatment to achieve, and in time, her father also joined treatment. Next slide, please. The CPP triangle is the foundation stone of our work. We extend CPP applications to different populations: perinatal, period, pregnancy, high conflict child custody, traumatic grief when a loved one dies. We also created group interventions that are brief for parents under high stress, teen parents, immigrant and houseless families, and families that are torn by war. Next slide, please. One of our central themes is that one does not need to be a therapist to be therapeutic. Traumatized children and parents are in primary care, child care, community programs, child welfare, the courts. And in all these settings, we try to foster an approach that is rooted in social justice and that is trauma-informed, relationship-based, and wellness-driven. Today's presentations will highlight some of this work. One example is CALQIC, a UCSF partnership with the California Office of the Surgeon General to screen for ACEs with patients on Medi-Cal. We adapted the CPP triangle to become triads, a screening framework that guides medical providers to explore the possible links between their patients' health problems and their life conditions, and engage with them in realistic healthcare plans. Trauma is universal and hurts, but people of all ages can grow from it. Leonard Cohen wrote, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light comes in." Our job is to witness the crack with deep empathy and then help cultivate children's and parents' ability to see more clearly. That's why we start in pregnancy and early childhood, when the horizons are the widest for the light to get in. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Chandra Ghosh-Ipen, our dissemination director, who will speak about the evidence base and dissemination of CPP.
Thank you, Alicia, for the introduction and for developing child-parent psychotherapy. Next slide. CPP is a manualized treatment with 5 randomized controlled trials conducted by 2 separate teams, our team and the team at the University of Rochester. Next slide. 4 of the 5 trials involved predominantly culturally diverse families, including one study where all participants were Spanish-speaking recent immigrant mothers. Next slide. Here are some of the key findings. Children who received CPP showed significantly greater improvements in symptoms. The graph on the left shows the number of children who met criteria for a DC 0 to 3 diagnosis of traumatic stress disorder. We see significant decreases from pre to post for the green group, but not the orange group. The green group received CPP. On the right, mothers who participated in CPP, again the green line, showed significantly greater improvements in their symptoms than comparison group mothers. On a story task, maltreated preschoolers who received CPP, the green line, showed significantly greater improvements in their view of their relationship with their mothers. The data also suggests that CPP results in significant improvements in attachment classification, even when compared to the teal group who received an intensive psychoeducational parenting intervention. There is evidence suggesting that CPP may buffer children from the potential impact of maternal depression. In this study, at intake, there were no significant group differences in child cognitive functioning. At post, CPP children showed higher IQ scores compared to both the community standard group in orange, and they look similar to a group of children whose mothers were not depressed, the gray line. Next slide. As we seek to understand the impact of psychosocial treatment on neurobiological outcomes, a study examining morning cortisol offers preliminary evidence that CPP may be effective in normalizing regulatory processes in infants who were reportedly maltreated. The community standard group in orange shows progressively lower levels of morning cortisol, whereas the combined intervention group in green looks similar to non-maltreated children, the gray line. Finally, given the focus on ACEs, we reanalyzed our data to see whether CPP was effective for those at highest risk. The dark orange line shows data for comparison group children with 4 or more traumatic experiences. Notice the lack of improvement in traumatic stress symptoms from pre to post compared to the dark green line, which is the 4+ group who received CPP. So we have the manuals, solid research, and we develop partnerships with systems to implement CPP with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and many others. Since 2006, we've partnered with systems and CPP trainers to implement CPP in 39 states, and next week it'll be 40 as we add Texas. On this map, the darker the green, the more CPP trainings. And in California, we've had over 68 18-month-long learning collaboratives and have trained thousands of providers. Next slide. We collaborate with over 74 CPP trainers building sustainability in 22 states. Our CPP roster helps families find trained providers. I like to think of each therapist as a light. Next slide. And this light is spreading across the world. We're in 6 countries with CPP trainers and sustainable CPP systems established in Israel, Sweden, and Norway. Moving forward, our team has been mindful of places where there is currently less capacity to serve young children and their families. Through our rural SAMHSA grant, Ann, Barbara Ivins, and other colleagues partner with rural communities, including 10 California counties, to support the development of early childhood trauma-informed systems of care. And since 2001, CTRP has been a site of the SAMHSA-funded National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Through this grant, we're building partnerships to spread CPP to states that are not yet green on our map. We're disseminating perinatal CPP and attachment vitamins, and we're growing our capacity to conduct CPP via telehealth and to partner with key systems. We're working to ensure that our reach is not only broad across our nation, but deep in our practice. As we wrote in our DEI statement, we believe that we need to not only address ruptures at the family level, but at a societal and sociocultural level, recognizing ongoing historical oppression that too many groups have experienced. To this end, we've committed time to growing ourselves and our CPP community of trainers in terms of our capacity to hold a DEI perspective. And we've established spaces like our Black CPP provider group and a Spanish-speaking provider call, where we can support and mentor providers of color who we hope will be the next generation of leaders. And now here is Dr. Miriam Hernandez-Dimler, Director of Community Programs.
Thank you, Chandra. As CPP gains momentum as a premier therapy for young children and their families, CTRP is increasingly recognized as the home of CPP. The very systems that nurture our families also open their doors and invite us to teach and train staff on how to implement trauma-informed practices. Along with the Office of Head Start and its network of collaborators, CTRP is part of a 5-year grant to promote trauma-informed practices across Head Start programs nationally. We know that the impact of trauma on children and their parents is not isolated to the family unit. The systems of care that support families are also touched by structural inequalities, as well as the interpersonal, historical, racial, and systemic trauma. We are piloting a model called trauma-attuned practices to address trauma in a comprehensive way. Our goal with this model is to promote wellness for young children and families by supporting their extended network of providers, like teachers, supportive staff, and early childhood specialists. We integrate the science-based information of SAMHSA's trauma-informed practices along with the core values of CPP, which holds connections and relationships as central to healing from trauma and growing resilience. Next slide. CTRP has a long-standing commitment to our local community. For example, Alicia has consulted with CPS for over 30 years, and we've provided consultation to nearby DV shelters. Generous funding from Tipping Point Community that began 13 years ago offered us the privilege of becoming, previous slide, please. We still need the map, thanks. Offered us the privilege of becoming a part of the milieu at local community-based agencies known for their success in providing under-resourced families concrete assistance and opportunities for financial advancement. The Tipping Point Mental Health Initiative places CTRP staff and learners within these organizations to enhance mental health capacity through staff consultation and training. In addition, we provide direct mental health services on site and have offered treatment beyond young children to include school-aged children, transitional-aged youth, and adults. This map illustrates CTRP's extensive reach to Tipping Point grantee organizations across the San Francisco Bay Area. Next slide, please. Here's some highlights to illustrate what is possible when you join a triad of forces: hospital, funder, and community. We served well over 2,000 clients over the years and learned that families have a high likelihood of following through with referrals when clinicians are co-located with community providers within a trusted setting, a setting that addresses multiple needs in families' life, like offering food, assistance with housing, employment, and education. We are also proud to strengthen the pipeline of BIPOC clinicians trained to navigate the complexities of delivering quality care while embedded within a community-based agency. Tipping Point and CTRP jointly received the Excellence in Partnership Award in Community Health and Policy Development in 2017. Next slide, please. Our program evaluation analyses with families who received CPP in community-based settings show that caregivers and their children experience statistically significant clinical improvements. These findings are particularly important because they replicate results from randomized controlled trials and provide evidence that CPP is effective in community samples. Next slide. Thank you. Some of our community partner sites had so many families interested in CPP that we designed a group therapy model to address long wait lists. Vilma Reyes took lead on this project and developed an intervention called Building Bridges, or Construyendo Puentes, which was implemented in English and Spanish. We saw caregivers ignite their pleasure in parenting and increase connection with their children. They explicitly asked us to lengthen the time spent in the opening mindfulness activities because, in a mom's words, I never get to relax even for a moment until I come here. We also found that a byproduct of this group was peer support, and it was common for parents to connect outside of group times and share resources. Building Bridges was the foundation for Attachment Seeds, or Semillas de Apego, which was born out of a collaboration with La Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. The heart of this group intervention was to promote healing among displaced families exposed to extreme conflict in war-torn areas of Colombia. Dr. Reyes saw the importance of tailoring the group to include tools and strategies already present among families. And so music, dance, and art was infused as ways to promote parent-child connections. The picture here illustrates some art co-created with families. A recent publication in The Lancet describes a randomized controlled trial showing that mothers in Tumaco, Colombia, who participated in Semillas de Apego, had increased connection with their children and showed lowered stress after group participation. Marquita Mays will now continue to illustrate the versatility of CPP to inform interventions with diverse groups. Ms. Mays is our co-director of perinatal mental health at CTRP and one of the developers of Embrace.
We've learned a lot in 25 years. One of those learnings is knowing it's never too early to address trauma for children. How much suffering can be avoided if the parents of traumatized young children we see could be reached before or during their pregnancy. Next slide. As a program, we've dared to expand our model to the perinatal period, providing treatment for pregnant people and their partners whose readiness to nurture, care, and protect their infants can often be compromised by traumatic stress and adverse life experiences. We believe that supporting parents-to-be with their trauma before the birth of their child is preventative and protective for healthy infant development. To achieve the goal of simultaneously healing the wounds of the past and preventing the repetition of those wounds with future generations, we utilize the treatment intervention called Perinatal Child-Parent Psychotherapy. This intervention offers specialized clinical expertise and specific training that supports clinicians to understand the complexities of applying an evidence-based trauma treatment during pregnancy and the first 6 months of life for infants. I want to acknowledge Dr. Gloria Castro, co-author of the PCPP manual and longstanding infant mental health provider, for her invaluable contributions and commitment to elevating the perinatal period in the life of families that is too often overlooked by our field. Next slide. Now I get to transition to my own labor of love, holding the pivotal transformative power of the perinatal period rooted in racial justice. The disproportionate complications and fatalities for Black birthing people and Black infants show that Black birthing people are 3 to 4 more times likely to die during birth, and Black infants are 3 more times likely to die in the first year of life. This data is linked to several issues, but what is not explicitly outlined is that at the root of these issues is systemic oppression, racism, and anti-Blackness. Our response to the data to the threat of being pregnant and giving birth while Black is Embrace, an interdisciplinary clinical program utilizing integrative collaborative care to reclaim health and wellness for Black births. CTRP's influence of acknowledging ghosts in the nursery, speaking the unspeakable of historical, cultural, and intergenerational trauma, and providing trauma-informed care has been instrumental in Embrace's development. We spend so much time trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, talking about doing it, particularly when it comes to racial health disparities, racial inequities, and racial injustice. Well, my colleagues and I are Black women using our gained power and privilege and are about action. Shout out to our small and mighty Black Girl Magic team. Next slide. Embrace is a racial concordant model focused on providing prenatal care from an angle of intentional racial consciousness, asserting communal and cultural wisdom, practices and traditions in medicalized birthing and modernized healthcare systems, and empowering Black parents and families with choice, agency, autonomy, and self-determination as protective buffers for their infants. Since 2018, Embrace has evolved to include the listed options you see here as bundled care. To date, we have 100% full-term and healthy delivery success rate. We call this safe passage. 20 of those babies are now 1 year and older. Next slide. CTRP has taught me that it's necessary to build programs and develop interventions that are trauma-informed for families and for the providers. One should always hold a system lens in addition to direct service. The work of justice takes an emotional toll and physical toll, especially for race concordant providers, where often the veil is very thin for us. The risk of provider burnout and turnover is very high. So Embrace is deliberate in creating an infrastructure that dismantles oppressive practices, expectations, and demands of the provider team. In April of 2021, Embrace hosted our first cross-departmental interdisciplinary soul care event, allowing for connection, fellowship, and wellness to mitigate isolation and booster the pipeline and retention of Black birth workers at UCSF. Just this week, we became a recipient of the UCSF Community Wellbeing Grant to continue providing these quarterly offerings for OB and psychiatry Black birth workers in 2022. Next slide. Just like all things that have come out of CTRP, we don't keep it to ourselves and within UCSF walls. And although our efforts in the perinatal period are our newest arm, PCPP is currently piloting the Learning Collaborative Training model for wider dissemination. And Embrace will be expanding provision of care in San Francisco in community-based health centers and mental health organizations in January 2022. We are speaking the unspeakable during pregnancy and taking the perinatal period seriously. Next, you will hear from Dr. Ann Chu, our research director, who will speak about how research and evaluation continue to inform our clinical and dissemination activities.
Thank you, Marquita. So as you've been hearing today, CTRP continues to push the field to widen our lens to think about the vulnerable, in particular, the babies in the first year of life and families entering the pregnancy period. And we continue to think about how to create opportunities to buffer the intergenerational transmission of trauma and adversity. I'll be highlighting a few of our main research projects that builds on the science toward these efforts. You heard about perinatal CPP from Marquita just now. As we were developing the model, we were also collecting some initial data looking at the treatment impact. We had 64 women start treatment in their third trimester, continuing until their newborns were 6 months of age. Data shows that pre to post treatment indicated that women improved in their depression and post-traumatic stress symptoms, as well as in their child rearing attitudes. More importantly, though, women who started with low maternal fetal attachments at baseline had even greater treatment improvements than mothers with higher maternal fetal attachments. And now we continue to build on these findings, and we're looking to set up a randomized control trial to further our evidence base for perinatal CPP that we're rolling out to the community. Another line of research looks at the effects of early life trauma on maternal and child physiology and physical health along with examining the biological improvement from our interventions. We've been fortunate to have had an ongoing collaboration with Nikki Bush for the last several years, examining biomarkers in relation to CPP. For the CPP Health Study, we recruited mother-child dyads, where clinicians from CTRP and also Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, the Early Intervention Services Program, where clinicians provided weekly CPP sessions. And at the same time, the biospecimens were collected pre and post-treatment. And in relation to the biomarkers, Nikki's team found that the children whose symptoms improved as a result of receiving CPP as a treatment also showed improvements in hair cortisol levels and telomere length. In addition, she found that exposure to violence during childhood and pregnancy for the moms were predictive of obtaining a particular maternal immune signature. And the mother-child dyads with those particular gene profiles, they were in turn less responsive to treatment. So you can really see that Nikki's work is helping us to utilize a precision medicine approach to inform who needs what type of services and supports. And excitingly, her research also confirms that the body does keep the score. And we're really excited to continue our collaboration with Nikki's team as we move to the new Pritzker building, and will be co-located next to her team. And earlier, and as everyone on our team has mentioned, babies in the first year of life is at the greatest risk for abuse, serious injury, and death. At the same time, we're constantly fighting with the misconception that babies are too young to remember, or that they're so resilient that we don't need to intervene when trauma happens so early in life. This misconception is prevalent even among providers. Our infant PTSD study stemmed from a debate that took place among providers who were developing the diagnostic system for infants and young children. Infant mental health providers and child psychiatrists expressed doubt that infants in the first year of life can even meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD. So Alicia and our team, we set out to interview caregivers of infants. We ended up with 116 caregivers of infants who were aged 3 to 18 months old, and they were exposed to potentially traumatic events. We found that the majority of the infants in our sample who were exposed to traumatic events actually did meet criteria for PTSD based on the DSM-5 criteria for children 6 years and younger. We also found that caregiver trauma symptoms were a significant predictor of PTSD diagnosis in the infants, as well as their symptom severity and the numbers of symptoms that were endorsed by the caregivers. So you can see together, this pattern of findings confirms what CTRP has been working on for the last 2.5 decades, that we cannot consider the babies without considering their caregivers. Babies only do as well as their caregivers are doing. It also affirms the value of our 2-generation approach in CPP and all of the related services that we're working toward. And it really shows us that trauma is embedded in the body from day one, and that babies cannot wait. And I'll put it back to Alicia now to wrap us up.
Thank you very much. This has been an extraordinary journey, and I want to thank our public and private funding sources, our magnificent team of providers and staff. Next slide, please. And in particular, the families in the next slide that have allowed us to be part of their village. And to go back to old wisdom, this is the time to continue the work. We look forward to the next 25 years. I am proud to be working with this magnificent group of young leaders in the program, and if not now, then when. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I will just say I thought I knew a lot, but the breadth of what you guys do is unbelievable, just tremendous. So thank you to everybody for presenting and for all you do for children in the department.